Hello, everyone. I'm Ali Aslan, international TV host and journalist, and it's my great pleasure to be the moderator of today's event titled Young Voices on the Future of Multilateralism. This event is facilitated by the Young Global Changers, a group of young policy thinkers and innovators from around the world, and it comes at a very crucial and timely moment, of course, not only because the United Nations marks its 75th anniversary this year, but also, of course, we are in the midst of a global pandemic. So this is going to be a very timely discussion and an event which is a joint project by the Global Solutions Initiative and 1014, which is why I'm delighted to be joined from New York by Chief Officer for Management at 1014, Katja Wiesbrock Donovan. Katja, wonderful to see you.
Also from my part, a warm welcome to our panelists, participants, and viewers from across the globe. 1014 is a new transatlantic organization named after its address at 1014 Fifth Avenue in New York City. We provide a space for ideas, a platform to address and discuss global issues of mutual concern. With the United Nations turning 75 and with its headquarters being here in New York, we wanted to invite young professionals to discuss the future of multilateralism. So we partnered with the Global Solutions Initiative and the Young Global Changers, who then really made this event happen. Not in New York as planned, but virtually. But still, with all the energy and spirit that the city normally exudes. Thank you, Ole. Thanks, Ali. Thanks to our teams. And last but not least, a big thank you to the Global Young Changers,
from who we will hear, of course, in detail. But first up is the program manager of the Young Global Changes program and director of the Global Solutions Summer School. Katja has already mentioned him. Great to have you. Ole, let's hear from you.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you, Katja. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. The Young Global Changers are a network of about 350 young people from more than 110 different countries. And I know that many of you are watching right now. This event was actually co-designed by a group of these Young Global Changers, and the preparations included designing and conducting an online survey. And I want to thank everyone who participated and who provided their ideas on the future of multilateralism. The feedback we received informed the event today, and some parts of it will be presented later during the discussion. But more importantly, your feedback will continue to inform our dialogue with the United Nations, with the German Foreign Office, and with others on the future of multilateralism. The Young Global Changers are engaged in projects and activities that all work towards the recoupling of economic, political, environmental, and social domains. And with today's event, the Young Global Changers want to give room to youth-led initiatives and ideas like these, but also to intergenerational dialogue. As Katja mentioned, 1014 was designed as a space for ideas. And I'm looking forward to our panelists, our guest speakers, and you, the audience, filling this space today with a vibrant debate on the future of multilateralism.
This gives me an opportunity, of course. Ola has just said that the Global Solution Initiative has created this very engaged global network of young individuals. And we could have had all of them, many of them here as speakers. So the Global Solution Initiative has decided to select 4 of them. And this is a good opportunity to introduce them before we hear from them later on. Magdalena Hess is an 18-year-old university student from Offenburg, Germany. She's a climate activist with Fridays for Future Germany, where she acts as a national social media spokesperson and coordinates Friday for Future social media activity. Welcome to Magdalena, who's joining us from Cologne today. Joining us from New York is Radha Kulkarni. She represents the Young United Nations Agents for Change initiative. She currently works at UNICEF in New York on partnerships and resource mobilization with a focus on development financing. Also very, very pleased to be joined from London by Anise Timmery. She's a campaigner with Together First, an international coalition calling for global governance reform. She also serves as a communication officer at the UN Association UK. And last but certainly not least, joining us from Toronto, Canada is Annika Zaumi. She's the Director of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion for Leading Change Canada. She also serves as the lead author of the UNESCO publication, #Youth Waging Peace, a youth-led guide on preventing violent extremism through education. We will hear from Annika, Anise, Rada, and Magdalena shortly. This, of course, gives me a great time and opportunity. Katja has already said this would have been wonderful to hold this event in New York today at a time when the United Nations marks its 75th anniversary. As a matter of fact, today's event is part of the UN Global Dialogue series at a time when the UN is marking this milestone, marking the 75th anniversary. And we're delighted and happy that UN Under Secretary General Fabrizio Hochschild-Drummond, the Special Advisor to Secretary General on the preparations for the commemoration of this anniversary, has taken time to join us to record a video, which we will have a listen to now. Fabrizio's video is coming up now.
Warm greetings to you from New York. This is the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, and to mark the occasion, at the beginning of this year, Secretary General Antonio Guterres launched a global listening tour. The objective was to seek fresh guidance and new inspiration to help the international community overcome the dangerous impasse in which we now find ourselves. That is, the potentially tragic contradiction in an ever more interdependent world between the growing number of global challenges and the retreat from the multilateral cooperation and mechanisms created 75 years ago to handle global challenges. We reached out to peoples across the world and listened to their views. We've received feedback through over 1,000 dialogues in 80 countries, and we've collected well over 1 million responses from people in all 193 UN member states through a mini-survey. We've worked with 2 renowned independent companies that have undertaken scientifically sampled representative polling, and we've reached out to universities and think tanks for their insights. The results are synthesized in the update report that we published on 21 September when the General Assembly held its official commemoration of the 75th anniversary. So what are the key findings? First, striking against the backdrop of polarization that too often characterizes interstate dialogue, respondents across all regions, ages, and social groups were remarkably united in their priorities for the future, remarkably united around their fears and their expectations of international cooperation. Amid the current COVID-19 crisis, the immediate priority for most respondents is improved access to basic services, such as affordable healthcare, safe water and sanitation, and of course education. Followed by, and this is the second main demand for post-COVID recovery, greater international solidarity, increased support to those hardest hit by the pandemic, and better tackling of inequality. Looking beyond the COVID crisis, the overwhelming concern is the climate crisis and the destruction of our natural environment. And it's very striking that even while fears around public health threats have grown, the number one concern for the future through the pandemic has remained the destruction of our environment and the climate crisis. With regard to perceptions of international cooperation and the UN, overwhelmingly, respondents to our mini-survey and respondents to the scientifically based surveys believe that global cooperation is vital to deal with today's challenges. 75 years after its founding, 6 in 10 respondents said that they believe the United Nations has made the world a better place. And looking to the future, An even larger majority said that they believe the UN is essential to tackling the challenges the world faces. Young people especially have very strong views about the importance of better international cooperation. But people are not looking for more of the same. They're not uncritical of our current forms of multilateralism or uncritical of the United Nations. Respondents want to see a UN that better reflects the stakeholders of the 21st century. They want to see a UN that innovates more and a UN that is more transparent, more accountable, more effective. Drawing on what we heard from across the world, the Secretary-General will now be working on concrete proposals to make the UN more inclusive and more effective. The world spoke, we listened, and we believe now it is time to step up action. The UN is all of us, and the responsibility for change lies with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you to UN Under-Secretary General Fabrizio Hochschild for taking the time to address the young global changers. And I'm very much delighted to be joined by Minister of State at the German Foreign Office, Niels Annen, who's with us live now. Minister of State, welcome. Lovely to have you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure and happy to be with you.
You just heard the words of Fabrizio Hochschild, who is understandably concerned that multilateralism at a time like this is under threat at a time when it is probably needed the most. You're obviously at the forefront of creating foreign policy for Europe's arguably most relevant and largest country. What has been your experience throughout this time? Is multilateralism seriously under threat? And if so, how to work about it, how to go about this?
No, I very much welcome the remarks of the Undersecretary. We have been working with him and the entire team to make a strong commitment, especially in the year where we're commemorating 75 years of the founding and the passing of the UN Charter. And look, I think there's no way to deny that multilateralism and its institutions are under serious threat. And we all know what happened not only in the last years, but also in very recent time. Important member states withdraw support, financial support, political support from various UN organizations. That is not only hard for the organizations to deal with, that is a step to undermine legitimacy. And I think it's necessary that especially the young generation that will be most affected on a long term by this undermining of legitimacy are speaking up. But Ali, I also, with your permission, would like to say that although the pressure on the system is making headlines, at the same time we see solidarity, we see cooperation. And with your permission, I would just mention that my foreign minister, Heiko Maas, together with his French counterpart and a group of other foreign ministers have launched an initiative not to found a new organization, but to form an ad hoc coalition, the Alliance for Multilateralism. And we're seeing a lot of positive responses. And we're seeing countries participating in the anti-vaccine coalition. We're seeing countries donating for humanitarian needs right now, virtually all over the world. And just today, the UN Deputy UN Envoy for Libya, to pick just one example, finally could declare a ceasefire for Libya. So the UN and multilateralism is under threat, but it's up to us to make it work and to fight for the idea that is as relevant as it was 75 years ago.
And you already said and reiterated that it is very important and welcome to have young people speak up and have their voices not just heard, but included in this process of revitalizing multilateralism. We are joined by some of the young global changers, amongst other in Toronto by Annika Zaumi. Annika, I know you wanted to address the state minister, so please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Minister Anand, for your contribution. I think something you've already touched on a little bit, but I'd love for us to explore is really the power of young people. You've recognized that we are the most affected by kind of the future of multilateralism and the future of a lot of this undermining of legitimacy. And I'd love for you to touch on, not just in Germany, but what you see in the future. I know that Germany is currently engaged in the Alliance for Multilateralism. So I'd love to know, in your vision for the future of multilateralism, how do you envision meaningful dialogue and engagement and inclusion of young people and other marginalized and vulnerable groups?
Look, first of all, thank you very much for speaking up and being here with us. I have been the leader of the youth organization of my party when I was still young. So I remember how hard it sometimes is to get young people's voices organized and to make yourself heard. So I believe that there's no way around getting organized and to make sure that your voice is heard. But also, I'm not, going to intervene in any domestic affairs here, but make your vote count if you are able to vote, and not to let that opportunity just go away. Another aspect is that the United Nations, of course, is an organization of states, but the leaders are listening to their respective publics as well. And if I compare today's discussions, and if I compare the technical instruments that you and your generation are able to use with the instruments that we had when I was the youth leader, I think there are so many opportunities to organize yourself beyond national borders. And the movement to push political leaders to act on climate change is just one out of many examples. And I hope, also because that's what I believe in, is that the young generation needs to continue to push their leaders to do just that. But it's also important to understand the regional and national political discussions, conditions. And my personal belief is that if we only address one aspect, for example, of the climate crisis, without looking at the social consequences also for the population that could feel excluded, that is depending, for example, on old industries, that is in danger of being used by populists, then we are probably going to make a mistake. So we need to listen to each other to understand the various political systems, but make use, and I know that this is already happening, make use of the new opportunities. And I can tell you in Germany, that had a real impact. And if it has an impact on a country like Germany, it also has an international impact. And if I just can say, one of the most prominent initiatives that Germany launched during its 2-year membership as a non-permanent member in the Security Council was to put the topic and the nexus between climate change and security on the agenda. So our friends in the United States threatened us with a veto, so we have no resolution, but we do have the discussion. Make use of what we did, and I hope that the next members of the Security Council will continue working on that initiative of ours.
Hopeful and encouraging words from the Minister of State at the German Foreign Ministry, Nils Anand. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And multilateralism, of course, has become abundantly clear, is at the heart of our discussion and event today. And that is why I'm delighted to be joined from Buenos Aires by Secretary General of the Club de Madrid, Maria Elena Agüero. Maria, wonderful to have you with us.
Wonderful to be with you, and good to work together again. Ali. And let me first thank the organizers very briefly, but really to thank the Global Solutions Initiative and the Everett Stiftung. We've worked with both of you over the years and partnered with both of you. And in fact, we are now working very closely with our colleagues from the Everett Stiftung in the preparation of our flagship event for this year, our policy dialogue for this year, which will in fact be next week and focusing precisely on multilateralism that delivers.
Maria, for those who may not be too familiar with the concept and work of Club de Madrid, what is the idea behind it?
Exactly, that's what I was just going to get to. The Club of Madrid is an organization that brings together and musters the capacity, the convening power, the experience, the access of democratic former presidents and prime ministers from around the globe, today over 100 from 70 different countries, who are putting at the service of global objectives, global concerns, and of course of democracy and fostering democratic values and leadership, that experience, that gravitas. And it's a very unique organization that it brings them together, and their experience, both individual but also collective, is what is brought to the fore. Obviously, this links up with multilateralism because the organization itself, as I said, has members, over 100 members from over 70 different countries. And there is a balance, let's say, a geographical, gender, political color balance that the organization tries to maintain. And because they are who they are, and they bring their experience, they discuss issues often that are on the international agenda. They work on issues that are on the international agenda. They help to build bridges between civil society and between civil society and governments, between stakeholders, between actors and decision makers of today. And that is, multilateralism is in a way, by definition, part of the organization's own vision. It is not just a tool, it is a vision.
It is, if you will, a part of the founding DNA of the Club de Madrid, multilateralism. That is, and interestingly enough, before the events, the Young Global Changers conducted a global survey. Let's put up the results if we can, because I think they're quite telling and are a clear indication of where today's conversation is headed. If we can have the first slide up here, where the Young Global Changers conducted a global survey. 93 of the respondents to the survey said they are worried, somewhat worried, or very worried about current trends in multilateralism. Maria, this is something that concerns you as the Secretary General of the Club de Madrid, but it concerns also and predominantly the younger generation out there. You represent a global network of former leaders who stand for multilateralism, as you said. How do you think we got to this point? How do you think multilateralism got so under threat and controversial?
If I may, I'd like to point to two reasons why. One, I think somewhere along the way, we've forgotten the we the people concept, the we the people basis of both international cooperation and democracy. That's on the one hand. The other, over the years, and especially in recent years, we've seen, as has been pointed out already, this pushback on commitments, this pushback on agreements. All of this means that the trust has waned, the trust on multilateralism, much as the trust in democracy. But how did we get there here? Because the way things have developed, we have lost that trust from the people who are at the basis of all of this, and the reason why all of this exists. Right.
And the trust, of course, needs to be rebuilt, particularly amongst the younger generation. Let's hear from them. We have Anise Timmery, as I said, she's a campaigner with Together First, an international coalition calling for global governance reform, joining us from London. Anise, many of the things that we talked about up until this point about multilateralism being under threats, being questioned, being assaulted globally. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do with Together First and how you try to counter and reverse this trend.
Well, thank you, Ali, and may I just echo the thanks to the organisers for kind of having us join for this really important conversation. I'm looking forward to the dialogue I'm going to have with my fellow panelists. Yeah, I mean, I think that Together First, the campaign that we've been running now for 2 years, kind of has seen that this trend emerging, understands that this threatens the very fabric of our international rules-based system, and sees that this kind of stasis is preventing world leaders from making the changes and the radical reforms that we need in order to face the challenges of not only today and the very real challenges of today, but the really urgent risks that kind of threaten our collective future. So we started a campaign in 2018 with the goal of kind of supporting the ideas that we think can help the world mitigate those risks. And our goal has been to identify the steps we need to take to create a governance system that we think is effective, is equitable, is open, is addressing those issues of trust, of performance that we see at the heart of this crisis. Because for us, the history of failed reforms is not an issue of a lack of ideas, rather a lack of political will and a lack of implementation. And we really want to overcome that by creating new channels of engagement and essentially running a global consultation that pooled these ideas together so that we could present 10 very specific recommendations that would be able to use this UN 75 moment, this really important year that has had this dialogue, that has then mandated the Secretary General to have a year of reform to present next year, to really integrate these ideas and to make some really necessary change. And I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more in detail about some of those issues. Because as I totally agree with the statements made before, we see rising populist nationalism essentially mean that states that used to be the flag bearer for multinationalism and our rules-based system now step away. And so we need to rethink the way that we have multi-stakeholder engagement at that top level in order to kind of overcome this trend of backing away.
And of course, Anase, we will continue hearing from you throughout this discussion. So we're very glad to have you with us, as well as Radha Kulkarni, who represents the Young UN Agents for Change initiative. Radha, for those who may not be familiar with this initiative, what exactly does it do? And most importantly, how does it contribute to the strengthening of the multilateral system?
Sorry, I was on mute. Young UN is actually a global network of more than 2,000 young people at the UN and across 100 plus countries. So basically what we do is we try and recognize some of the common challenges across the UN and then proactively try and address them to be able to reform the UN system, to be able to actually live by the challenges or the principles rather that we stand for as the United Nations. So that is the Young UN Network where we step up. And it is completely voluntary, in addition to our day jobs, which is at the UN. And in terms of, I think, multilateralism in general and how the Young UN kind of contributes, I think we truly believe that the multidimensional challenges that are confronting humanity today are really, there is an urgent need, so to say, of leadership to project a unified global vision. And when that is actually required, but on the other hand, we are seeing that most of these things in a quickly changing world, multilateralism is not seen valuable enough. So how we can really build international support, multi-stakeholder commitment for that global unified vision and enhance institutional effectiveness at the same time, because UN is historically known to be bureaucratic and slow. So how we can mobilize the global society really for effective action. And the UN has to really quickly step up and adapt to the changing times. It cannot be, completely operating like it used to 75 years ago when it was actually founded. Because there are so many mega trends today that we see, such as technological revolution, artificial intelligence, which would need very different ways of thinking, very different ways of countering some of the challenges that will face humanity. And the intergovernmental norm settings, the traditional forms of treaties and agreements may not necessarily work because it may need concepts such as like global compacts. It may need to be rethought in terms of how we can innovatively finance development through initiatives such as the financial transaction tax or the airline tax, which has shown much promise in the past, and how the UN can actually be a platform for sharing some of these best practices. Also, with all of these changes, on the one hand, it could really help us achieve the SDGs exceptionally well. However, on the other hand, it could also entrench injustice, poverty, and increase the inequality that exists in the world. So therefore, it is really, really important for us to, strike that balance where we can and should be able to bridge that gap. And I think lastly, I would say that in addition to, thinking about new ways of international norm settings, second being innovative models of financing development, I think the third thing that is really helpful is how we can really rethink the UN's governance structures and the way of working, from really hierarchies to self-managed teams, from coordination to collaboration, from risk aversion to innovation, expanding alliances with the private sector, and I think most importantly, authentic and relatable leadership, which kind of the young people look up to. So some of these changes are underway, and we think as Young UN much still remains to be done. Because if we continue business as usual, we will literally be sleepwalking into a world that widens inequality and exclusion, uncertainty. So
absolutely,
we can change many lives if we take decisive action. And if we actually try and unlock the countless opportunities that lie ahead, and hence the time to act is now, and that is what we try to do at the Young UN.
The time to act is now. Much still remains to be done, that's for certain. Maria, you still with us? You just heard Anase and Radha talk about their initiatives and their work. Before we let you go, how can the international order ensure that voices, initiatives, and ideas like these are heard and be incorporated into the decision-making process?
Here again, thank you. And what I've heard is very, very, very important and inspiring. I'd like to make a reference to something I also heard some time back from our young colleagues in a dialogue between our members and in one of our projects on young Mediterranean voices. And that was, we are not the leaders of the future, we are the leaders of today. So young leaders are acting today. Today, we heard, I think, two verbs or two actions that we have to keep in mind. One is to listen, and both Fabrice Hochschild and Minister of State Annan referred to the listening that we have to do, that all of not only the organizations, the governments, but the stakeholders, we have to listen, and we have to listen to each other. And the other is building bridges. That is something that the Club of Madrid members do, and they have a will to do this. They are no longer in power. They do not have any agendas. They have many networks. They have a strong voice, and they have the possibility of that access and that convening power and the gravitas to build those bridges and to do so effectively. And we've done so with many civil society organizations. And of course, and again, Ali, to something you mentioned at the very beginning, the very concept of engaging with youth. When you are an organization that have members that have experience, the very concept of engaging, listening to youth is part of the DNA. This is one of the things that we absolutely have to do, and that our members are doing, not only in the Club of Madrid, I have to say this, but also in their individual capacities as well.
Many, many thanks to Maria Elena Agüero, the Secretary General of the Club de Madrid, for joining us today from Buenos Aires, for taking the time. Thank you so much. Stay safe and healthy, Maria.
Thank you. I'm going to try to stay a little longer to listen.
Absolutely. More than welcome to. As a matter of fact, this next slides that we're about to put up is the response on the part of the respondents in the survey, in the context of the survey, asking where multilateral cooperation is needed the most. So that was the question, which central area, where is multilateral cooperation needed the most? If we can put up the slide. And perhaps a little surprising, most of our survey respondents believe that climate change is the central area, the most important area where that cooperation, where international cooperation is not just needed, but indispensable. Niels Annan had already referred to it, which of course brings me to Magdalena, who is with Fridays for Future Germany. Magdalena, a hot topic yesterday was also the second US presidential debate. Climate change came up there as well. My question is, what motivated you? You're an 18-year-old student. What motivated you to get involved in climate activism and become part of Fridays for Future?
Well, at first it was mostly that I learned about climate change in school and in various other contexts, and I got informed and I realized that policymakers, but in general, almost every country on the world isn't doing enough against it, and that a lot of bad things are already happening because of it, and that these things don't change on their own, and that change needs to happen, and that simply what we're doing now isn't enough. And I think that it's important it has in the past, we've been talking a lot about climate change, but not a lot of things have changed. And even in the last year, where we have been really present almost everywhere, the necessary changes haven't happened yet. So regarding one of the countries that have caused the climate crisis as almost the most, they don't have sufficient goals, and they don't have a plan how to achieve the 1.5 degree goal that we need to achieve in order to limit the drastic consequences of the climate crisis. And I think the fall has already happened in the past. So we can already see the consequences of climate change, especially in the global south. It's not something that will affect us in the future, but that is affecting a lot of people right now. I think this urgent was one of the points where that made me so active, and that made me join this movement. And yeah.
And it's a movement, of course, Magdalena, that has become an international, global name and brand, if you will. If you look back at the previous months, are you content with the degree of progress that Friday for Future has been able to achieve on a political level? As you said, this is a very slow step approach, and you need takes time to get political leaders on board. But by and large, how would you evaluate the progress and success so far?
Not very high, to be honest, because I think that we have to wait. We will achieve a goal if the politics have a plan and act just as scientists say, and to in fact validate the Paris Agreement as much as it's needed. But we can't see that by now, and we've talked to a lot of politicians, we've talked to a lot of decision makers, and we've talked to a lot of people who would have been able to change something, but in fact, not that much happened. The emissions haven't decreased, and that's the topic that's the only thing that really matters to us. Of course, it's nice that people listen to us, and of course, it's nice that people all over the world are standing up, but at the end, it's all about the emissions, and it's all about the science, and if nothing changes there, it's not the change we need.
So mostly words than actions that you are seeing. Magdalena, thank you so much for your frank and honest assessments here. Anissa, as part of your campaign, you compiled a list of 10 measures to improve the international system. One of them, I believe, is an integrated approach to climate and security. What exactly do you mean by that?
Thank you, Ali. I'll come to that question, if I may, just in a moment. I just wanted to pick up on something from what Magdalena was saying in this question of kind of where action and accountability, because, as Magdalena is saying, is we may have targets, we may have international agreements, but ultimately, if states and parties to these agreements are not living up to their targets, there is very little progress made. And that's why for us, just as a basic, at a basic level, that's why it's so important for us and through our campaign to change who is at the table when these decisions are taken, and to change them and to open up our institutions in order to have a degree of extended accountability to make sure that these targets can't be missed again and again. And then just in terms of climate and security, this was actually a very specific recommendation that came out of our global consultation. And it's primarily based on the work by an expert based in Brazil, Adriana Abdenor. In essence, it looks at incorporating climate and security into the work of the United Nations, and saying that at the moment it's a severely overlooked element of climate action. There is growing evidence, of course, that the world is approaching a point of no return when it comes to climate change. And we know that climate change magnifies, it accelerates, and it diversifies insecurities that exist. So from violence, such as organized crime in the Amazon, to violent extremism in the Sahel. And essentially, we want to say that by bringing attention to the security implications of climate change, we can better mobilize not just member states, but all the different stakeholders that are impacted by this, which is of course everybody, but that is civil society, that is businesses, that is international organizations. And so the main part of this recommendation is to institutionalize a mechanism that already exists at the United Nations, which is the UN Climate Security Mechanism, and make a move to make sure that this framework is adopted fully. And I believe that actually Germany is who sits on the Security Council, is leading efforts to do this. And I'll wrap up by pointing out two specific points of that recommendation, which are that the Secretary General the Office of the Secretary General should compile an annual report that looks at climate and security and has inputs from the whole United Nations system. And secondly, that climate and security analysis should be mainstreamed into the Security Council's work. And if it's brought into that agenda, that means that wider debates can be had on the issue at the General Assembly and at the Human Rights Council.
Interestingly enough, this is a perfect segue to the portion where we focus on multilateralism, peace, and security, of course. And we've been joined virtually and via video by Fabrizio Hochschild, UN Under-Secretary General before. Now it's my great pleasure to be setting up the video statement by the CEO and President of the International Crisis Group, Robert Malley, certainly someone for whom this is a daily bread and butter, who works on this topic at the very highest level. Let's hear and see what Robert had to share with us.
3 decades ago, the end of the Cold War created an opportunity for organizations like the United Nations to play a greater role in peacemaking and peacekeeping worldwide. My own organization, the International Crisis Group, was created 25 years ago to contribute ideas and analysis to this new generation of peacemaking. We work closely with officials from the UN and from all kinds of regional organizations to identify emerging conflicts in regions like the Sahel, or find solutions to conflicts like that is raging in Yemen. This is often slow and painful work. Nonetheless, history shows that multilateral organizations, whether governmental or non-governmental, can play a crucial part in conflict prevention and resolution today. But important questions loom over the future of both multilateralism and conflict resolution. First, while mounting tensions among China, the US, Russia, paralyze decision-making forums like the Security Council, Second, how can organizations like the United Nations or regional organizations like the EU or the African Union or others respond to complex new security challenges arising from climate change? Third, how will new technologies, which range from drones to cyber warfare to artificial intelligence, reshape politics and conflict? Can multilateral organizations and governments define new rules to minimize the risk these new technologies pose and maximize the opportunities they may present? Fourth, and crucially, as we witness the end of one world order and the beginning of something new, will whatever follows display a greater sense of equity and fairness and inclusion? These are questions that will test your generation of decision makers and shape the future of international security. I look forward to learning your answers.
Thank you so much to Robert Malley, the CEO and president of the International Crisis Group. Annika, following up on what Robert Malley was saying, you co-authored a youth-led guide on preventing violent extremism through education. And when we talk about multilateralism, peace and security, the component of education, of course, ought not to be underestimated here. Could you talk about the role of education in this particular context?
Sure. So first of all, thank you all for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with my fellow panelists and with all of the great speakers today. When we think about education, I think the biggest piece for me, coming from a background where I do a lot of diversity and equity mainstreaming in my day-to-day, that's my bread and butter, is really looking at what are the factors that are excluding certain portions of the population, usually based on certain aspects of their identity, so race, gender, sexual orientation, and more. And what I've found is that the systems that have reinforced this marginalization or actually continue to uphold this injustice depend on individuals' lack of access to quality education in allowing these individuals or facilitating these individuals in remaining in their existing marginalized states. One of the biggest things when you're looking at anti-oppression work is if you don't understand the language or the tools of oppressors, you aren't able to dismantle the systems or the causes leading to social, economic, political, and all the other types of exclusion that individuals face. So when we're thinking about multilateralism, when we're thinking about continuing to legitimize and strengthen existing multilateral relationships, when we're thinking about forming new relationships, we need to really think about what is it that what are the messages that are being sent through the education, either the ones that we've received through our own nation's education systems, or even through our intake of social media and other technological and social media platforms. What is the access to education that we have? What is the quality of the education we have access to? And what are the implicit or explicit messages that are being sent? Are they reinforcing injustice and oppression? Are they reinforcing this division that we're really bringing to light? I'm not going to say that we're increasing or decreasing division in recent years. I think we're really understanding more of a lot of those systemic and deeply rooted inequities that people have been experiencing since the beginning of time. But once we are ensuring that we're allowing everyone to equitably access education and language and technology in a way that allows them to equip themselves with the knowledge and the tools to overcome that, that's how we know that the education that we're delivering is successful.
Thank you so much for elaborating on this aspect and highlighting it again, how important it is. Radha and Anisef, perhaps you can pick up on this and talk a little bit about what your institutions are doing to improve multilateral conflict resolution. Radha, go ahead.
Thanks. So I think very, very important points were made. I think the primary starting point for multilateralism or any kind of inclusion, so to say, would be the leadership style, I would imagine. I mean, it has to be empathetic, it has to be collaborative, it has to be inclusive, transformational, you know, in a way somehow exercising influence, not authority. And I think that kind of brings in more confidence, if you like, in the multilateralism the idea of multilateralism. And it also, I think, being on the topic of young people, I think the leadership style also kind of gives young people more space to learn, grow, and kind of empower them, if you like. And I think it also promotes somewhere, if multilateralism includes or promotes buy-in and support from, you know, a large group of stakeholders, it kind of builds that coalition, so to say. And perhaps a way of working that's democratic, inclusive, participatory, where there's openness, transparency, where there's accountability, which is extremely important actually. And the concept being solution-oriented, non-hierarchical, flat, encouraging collective thinking, embracing change, creativity, constant learning. I think that's when really everybody would feel that it's everybody's collective ideas or collective kind of progress that needs to be made. And I think, lastly, I think it's important to note that though there is a lot of work that's being done, like mentioned before, there's so much more that needs to be done. And not only just including the voices in the process, but also in the actual decision making, so that the voices of young and the most vulnerable people who have small voices or no voices at all are heard and are included. And I think that's when multilateralism in its true spirit will take shape, to my mind.
Magdalena, it's already been mentioned throughout this discussion, the link between climate change, peace and security, the fact that they're all closely connected. Is Fridays for Future cooperating with other movements, peace movements out there?
We're working on an intersectional approach ourselves, because we see the climate crisis as a crisis that's affecting a lot of areas, and that you can't separate, for example, from social justice and from other important topics that we're currently regarding. So I think that it's something you can't work on. You can't only work on the climate. So we call ourselves mostly a climate justice movement, and that's rather what we are doing than other things. And we are working together with other groups sometimes. So for example, that's different from place to place. So in Germany, we've been working together, for example, with a lot of the organizations who want to assure safe migration and who want to help the people who are currently living in on Moria, which is a refugee camp where the people live under really bad conditions. And of course, that's also a peace topic we're addressing. And I think it will be something that will get more important in the future, because one of the most important threats to peace in the future will be the climate crisis, and will be, for example, the resource conflicts and the lack of water in some areas where the people simply can't live properly and can't, the agriculture, for example, is also really affected, and farmers are the ones who already experience a lot of the consequences of the climate crisis. So I think that you can't separate these topics, and it's something that definitely needs to be worked on. Definitely
Space and potential for a more collaboration. We've heard from Radha, Anise, Annika, and of course, Magdalena, but we do want the viewers to get everyone involved here with their ideas and questions. As a matter of fact, Ola has pointed it out in the beginning. Unfortunately, we had some technical problems there. We had asked all our viewers to use Slido to give us your ideas on how to increase participation and inclusion in multilateralism. I've been told, though, despite the technical difficulties, that viewers and participants have been quite actively using Slido. So let's see what you came up with. Let's have a look here. And I think we can all see there needs to be reform at the UN institutions that allow civil society, not only governments, to have a real voice and participation. Certain processes is one. Make your vote count is what Mr. Anderson said on making young voices heard. Well, then let's lower the voting age to 16 years. Accountability, transparency, participation. Certainly accountability, a word that has come up quite a few times. We need new instruments to enable the international system to be better, and so on and so forth. So we have quite some input, which our four panelists are also seeing. And I do want to give you the opportunity, perhaps starting with Annika this time, to react to what you're seeing. Are there any points that you would like to address? In particular, accountability is one, lowering the age in which you can participate in election is one. I want to give you a chance to react, Annika.
Thank you so much, Ali. First of all, these are amazing responses. I'm scrolling through them in the background, and it's really, really great to see some of the pieces here. I think a really big theme that I'm seeing is a lot of this desire from young people to really be involved in these high-level political multilateral spaces. And one thing that I really want to underscore is that there are existing systems and existing platforms for young people to be involved, including in the UN spaces. So one great example that I take part in is the United Nations Major Group of Children and Youth, which is the official youth and children stakeholder group representing youth and children's priorities to the United Nations. And it's free to join, allows you to really direct your participation. And there's a ton of other organizations very similar to that allow people to, in different capacities, contribute their perspectives to international, multinational organizations. There's things like the Y20, the Youth 20 Summit, which is the youth stakeholder arm of the G20 meetings, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meetings, which also have the Commonwealth Youth Forum that allow young people to share their priorities to Commonwealth Heads of Government. So there are lots of really great platforms out there, and I encourage you all to really look critically at where your own skills are most strongly aligned, where you want to learn more skills, where your real interests are. Is that within a national youth strategy? Is that within a local youth strategy? Is that within an international youth strategy? And seek out those opportunities. And the other piece there is, of course, as Elena mentioned earlier today, is that young people are not the leaders of tomorrow. We're the leaders of today. So if there's ever a piece where you find that there may not be an opportunity for you to get involved, but you know inherently, and we all know here, the value of having young perspectives involved and present and meaningfully engaged in these spaces, create your own ways to get involved. Create your own spaces, create your own initiatives, your own organizations that can really advocate for more youth perspectives and more young people being mainstreamed into these spaces where real decisions are being made.
Thank you so much, Annika. Perhaps we can put up the questions again, or rather the input, the suggestions that we've been getting while Enise is taking a crack at it. Certainly too much to respond at once, of course, but if there's one thing, Enise, that sort of catches your attention, please go ahead. We have accountability, transparency, participation, lower voting age, quite a range of suggestions and recommendations there.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you, Annika, for those wonderful ways for people to get involved, because I think they're really vital, and what so much of our conversation has really pointed out, and what a lot of those responses show, especially when it comes to kind of accountability, transparency, representation, is that civil society and when we take youth as a component and a really valuable and integral component of the wider civil society, we see that role is indispensable in ensuring, in fact, that accountability takes place, because we need civil society, we need youth as part of civil society. We need Fridays for Future. We need all of these different movements, all of these different initiatives that Annika is encouraging you to start to exist in order to make sure that our multilateral system is held to account. And what we've been really, one of our main proposals focuses on is a way for civil society to have an even more integrated role at the United Nations, because there are absolutely really vital functions of participation, of engagement, of outreach. But what we really are lacking is a champion for civil society. So we are releasing a report tomorrow, and we are starting to gather momentum around a campaign that calls for a dedicated representative at the United Nations whose role it is to engage with civil society so that they can increase the organization's limited capacity in engaging with them, to make sure that engagement is more consistent across the UN system, and most importantly, to give greater assistance to civil society organizations from the global south and from underrepresented demographics, because that's what matters. We can't have international systems that work for we the peoples if they are not made up of we the peoples, if they do not reflect the citizens they are there to protect and to make a more prosperous world for.
Radha, I think many of these comments can be summed up as include more young perspectives, include the voice of the younger generation. I know you're working at it obviously throughout your initiative, but how much resonance, how much support, how much attention are you getting within the established UN framework?
So thanks, Ali. Thanks for the question. I think, like mentioned before, that there is a huge kickstart, which is incredible, given the history of multilateralism, which was very closed. It is opening up, and thankfully so. So the Young UN, for example, has been a part of high-level committees of management and reforms. We are a part of most dialogues, so including the UN 75 celebration. So I think that kind of shift is beginning to happen, where the UN has begun to see value in the young voices and their participation and their inclusion. But like I mentioned before, I think though there is a start, I think it's important to have these voices not just in the process, but also in the actual decision making. And I think that's a journey that we have to undertake over the years. But that has definitely begun in terms of being a part of discussions and consultations and a part of the actual dialogues. But I think what's really going to be the defining moment of inclusivity and participation, non-hierarchical, flat democratic structures is going to be when that seat at the actual table kind of comes in, which is at the decision-making table. So I think that's the journey that we have begun, and the hope is that we perhaps get there and try and make the world a better place in whatever little way we can.
Magdalena, certainly Fridays for Future is trying to get their seats at the table to get heard loud and clear in Germany, but throughout the entire world, as a matter of fact. Again, how disillusioned are you? You're 18-year-old, you're a student, you're politically active at the forefront. How disillusioned, how disappointed are you with the current political elite?
I would say that you can't say that, see them as one, because it's a lot of we're talking about a lot of different things now. So for example, every country needs to be seen separately, and every organization has to be seen separately. And for example, a lot of things the United Nations are doing now are already going in the right direction. Meanwhile, a lot of other decision makers, such as, for example, the European Parliament aren't going that well. So we can there see some rather not tendencies that aren't that great and tendencies that are rather going in the wrong direction. So in general, I'd say that we aren't at the greatest point we have ever been to, but I would see it as a chance to improve certain things. And we are at a point where we have a lot of issues to tackle, but I think it's possible to do that. And by including young people in this process and by creating the right representation, because I think it's hard to get people engaged in politics when there isn't a representation of young people, and especially young female people, in most decision-making process. So that's what I would say to that point.
Yeah, despite the difficulties and obstacles that you may encounter, all four of you, of course, throughout your work, I think one thing that is still common to all of your personal traits is optimism. I think you have to be optimistic in order to do what you do and in order to get engaged on a daily basis, which is also one of the questions we are asking the audience. How optimistic are you actually for the year 2045? That's in 20 years from now. We'll come to the results of that in just a moment. But Magdalena, of course, is joining us from Germany, which has been ruled for 16 years by Chancellor Merkel. And the person who has advised her for many years, sort of her right hand for many, many years, is now the German ambassador to the United Nations, Christoph Heusgen. And he has taken the time and seized the opportunity to address today's forum. So let's see what Christoph Heusgen has to say and wants to share with us.
We have to be honest. Multilateralism today is in danger. We witness a rise in populism and nationalism. And COVID-19 doesn't make it easier. Many young people are deprived of their possibilities to get education, to get jobs. But then there's also a pushback. We see very many active young people, and Greta Thunberg is only one example. We have wonderful young people who right now raise their voices, and we have to listen to them. We have to give them a chance to raise their voices, and we have to make sure that young people participate in decisions, in peace processes. And we here in New York in the Security Council have promoted young people participating in our debates. Just to give a few examples, we had a young woman, a young indigenous woman from Chad brief the council. We had 3 young women from Kosovo and Serbia who were building bridges between the 2 countries. Or we have also a young woman from Syria who was briefing the council on humanitarian access and how humanitarian goods get into the country. So there is a lot of hope. Germany will promote young people. We know that more has to be done, but I'm optimistic. I see so many young people with enthusiasm engaged in the many issues that we are facing, and I'm very optimistic. I'm optimistic in the young generation and for multilateralism.
Well, that's a very optimistic, hopeful, upbeat message that we just heard from the German ambassador to the UN, Christoph Heusgen. It's wonderful because before we went into the video, we talked about optimism and that it is an integral part, indispensable part for the work that the 4 of you are doing. Being mindful of the time, we have approximately 10 minutes left. Let's do a final round here. Anise, we're being joined virtually by many people today watching this discussion, many young people. What message do you have for those who say it's lovely that what you do, it's wonderful, it's commendable what you do? What advice would you give them to get involved and in a very practical way, how they can contribute to multilateralism and the international collaboration, the international system as we know it, to the political process, in short?
Well, thank you, and really thank you all again for this conversation. If I can just start on the hope thing that I know wasn't really part of your question, but to say that 2020 has been a rough year is an understatement. But I think that in the face of kind of these crises of this scale, what we see is actually we have had a session that at the heart of it looks at where multilateralism has been in crisis itself. But we have seen this year more than ever that multilateralism is needed, that actually in the face of global crisis, we have to have global solutions. And then as that peters down, we have to have engagement at all levels. And what I would say to young people, although I still would hope to call myself a young person, I think that, thank you. Although I think by some metrics at the United Nations, I might not be, but we'll ignore that. So I think that what I am always in awe of is the countless ways that young people today are innovating in their activism. And I think that is something really important. And I think that that's where we will start to see really necessary and urgent change is in new patterns of thought, new ways of doing, new systems. And I think that young people today need to know that they absolutely have the power to do that. Voting, of course, is the ultimate starting point, because as we've heard in this panel, you know, international organizations such as the United Nations are made up of member states, and member states are directed by their domestic policies, and we will always have that. And multilateralism does not have to negate sovereignty, and that's a really important thing, and I hope people will take that away too. And so the right to vote, use it, and you can make that difference, and just keep doing what you're doing, because I think that we are seeing tides of change. And I think that UN 75, this really remarkable conversation that the United Nations started, which I think saw that, you know, 87% of over 1 million people responded to that survey. And I think over 87% of them still really believed in international cooperation. So like, let's use this as a launch pad for the really meaningful change that we need, and keep fighting the good fight. To all of you, I'm totally in awe.
Regardless of any artificial and arbitrary age metrics, you are more than young. All four of you are young and are role models, more importantly, with and for the young, rather. You, of course, as well. That is why. Let me also get your take and the message that you would like to convey today to people out there, particularly young people who look at what you do and say, I want to get involved. What is your message to them?
I think well, it's extremely important, like mentioned right now, that hope is the one thing that we can't let go of. Optimism is the one thing, though 2020 has been a rough year. That's one thing that you know, we just cannot let go, because we are, like it was mentioned, leaders of today. And with all the changes that are happening in the world, it is kind of what goes on inside a country can no longer just be the concern of that country alone, because it has increasingly become, you know, all challenges have become transboundary. So, I mean, there is kind of that need where, you know, all of the changes, no matter what we are doing, will impact the larger picture, the bigger picture. So my humble kind of appeal to all of us, the young people, would be to not give up hope, to kind of keep up with the optimism, and to keep moving forward. And no matter what we contribute to, it is somewhere contributing to the larger picture. It is somewhere contributing, you know, to the larger picture. And we have seen across the world the power of the young people, maybe for climate, for democracy, for rights, for, I mean, across the spectrum. And like it was mentioned, I am absolutely in awe as well. So we have to be at it, keep moving forward, and never lose hope, because I think the only chance at a better world is us, and the time to act is really now. And that is a collective call to action for all of us. So let's you know, take that baton and keep moving forward.
Christoph Heusgen, in his remarks, was quite upbeat, hopeful, and optimistic, and I'm very Happy to hear that our two first speakers, Radha and Enise, are sharing that optimism, are sharing that hope. Magdalena, I suppose there's no doubt that you are in full agreement. Otherwise, you wouldn't devote your time and energy to do what you do.
Yes, I am in agreement, of course. I think what I would add on is maybe that the responsibility to make these young voices heard isn't ours. I think the young people who want to engage and who are engaging are already there. I don't think that there's much need to empower them anymore, but rather to listen to us seriously and act appropriately, because I've talked to a lot of politicians, and I've talked to a lot of people who have talked with politicians about the climate crisis. And often it was really hard because you had to explain everything on, and they were always saying that you were really inspiring and everything, but it's not like we don't want to be inspiring, we want other people to act, and I think that's important. But all in all, I think what's important to remember is that you can really make a change, and that it's amazing how much young people can have already changed in the last couple of years. So I think, for example, it's almost impossible now to talk about the climate without talking about the Fridays for Future movement and without talking about it as a crisis. And it's also something that I think the participation on the social networks, for example, has increased a lot, and people are not longer accepting bad excuses regarding decisions that aren't made in a good way. So yeah, that's what I would say to that.
Absolutely. The hope that public admiration and support is one thing, but at the end of the day, what really counts is implementation of the ideas that Fridays for Future put forth. Annika, before we wrap up, of course, we want to hear from you as well, rounding up this beautiful discussion about what message you might have to our audience out there, who each and every one, of course, is a role model in their own right.
Thank you so much, Ali. And I think you've really presented this or formulated this with an excellent segue. What I really want to share is that those of us who are here on this panel today, a lot of us have had that experience or continue to do work from the top down. We do a lot of policy work, we do a lot of international advocacy in whatever spaces that we're in. But I really don't want that to distract or delegitimize the important value of doing work at the grassroots level as well. In fact, when I do a lot of anti-oppression trainings, I share it with people that a world working towards justice needs people who work from the top down, needs those state leaders, needs those young advocates, needs those policymakers from the top. But we also need those people who are thinking about the short-term immediate effects of inequality and how it affects us. We need those people who are creating new policies from the top and who are bringing it down in the long term to really change the way that we deliver education, services, programming. But we also need those people who are doing work at the grassroots level, whether that means, creating initiatives, whether that means rallying people for protests, or whether that means just challenging your own family member at the dinner table about what perspectives they might have that may be harmful. So all of this to say is that you don't need to be in a certain position or have a certain validated title in order to do important work in our journey towards climate justice, towards social justice, towards equity in the future. But rather that wherever you are right now is an important place for you to be. And while there is value in aspiring to more, I don't ever want you to think as young people that the spaces that you're in right now are not spaces in which you can make incredible impact.
Radha, Enise, Annika, and Magdalena, I think I speak for all when I say we all admire your work, we all support your work. You are wonderful role models out there working at the forefront for a better world, making us all, regardless of which generation you belong to, making us more hopeful and optimistic, which brings me, of course, to the very last question that we posed to our audience members today about how optimistic they are for the future. In particular, we gave a very specific timeline for 2045, 20 years, 25 years from now. Let's see, let's have a look at the result. Worse off overall, do you think that people in 2045 will be better off, worse, or the same as you are today? So worse off, 40%, better off. Yeah. So that hope and optimism obviously seems to rub off a little bit more on the audience members, but I think it's also a realistic snapshot, if you will. You all alluded to the fact that 2020 has not been the most uplifting year for obvious reasons. So that certainly dampens the mood as well, and influences such votes. But it all gets to show that all four of you, of course, and beyond, there's a lot more work to do for a more hopeful and better coexistence. Ole, those have been, I think I speak for you, for all, these have been very inspiring 90 minutes. And as the program manager of the Young Global Changes program, this is your time to chime in. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Ali. So you leave it to me to pick up the mood after this slide. I'll try my best at the very end. I'll keep it very brief. I just wanted to say a big thank you to all our speakers, especially to our four wonderful panelists. That was really inspiring. And I know that you don't only aim for inspiration. And I'm here, and let's try to turn this into action. And there was so much we had to talk about today, and I know that on so many issues we barely scratched the surface. That is why we would like to stay engaged with you on these matters. And after the event, you will find more information on our website. We'll send an email to all registered participants to take this to the next level, hopefully. Let me also thank 1014 for hosting this wonderful event, and maybe sometime in the future we can actually meet in person at their wonderful venue at 1014 Fifth Avenue in New York. And that time, then maybe we can avoid the small technical glitches we had in the beginning here today. Let me also thank the United Nations and the German Foreign Office for engaging with us and for having these dialogues. And of course, I want to thank all our supporting partners and funders of the Young Global Changes program, without whom none of this would be possible. And finally, let me thank you all for joining us today and for sticking with us until the very end. And my very special thank you goes to the Young Global Changes community, and especially to the members of our engagement group on the future of multilateralism and global governance. And with that, I wish everyone a wonderful weekend and a great 75th United Nations Day tomorrow. Take care, bye-bye, and stay safe.